Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 3 of the Q&A. So let me get my hat on, get to this first question, and let's knock it out. All right. Hey Jason, you often talk about muscular failure and the various reasons why it shouldn't be occurring with any regularity in training. But what level of failure is truly detrimental? If one goes to the point where they're absolutely sure they can't get another but don't actually attempt and fail a rep, does this carry as much of the same negatives as trying to push past one's limits? All right, great question. A great question. You know what? When you're talking about stopping one rep short of failure, meaning you've just completed, say, your 6th rep with 250 pounds, and you know you can't get that 7th rep, so you don't try that 7th rep. That's training at 90% pretty much. That's like RPE 9, meaning you know that was your last good rep, so you stop there. You don't attempt one that you're 90% sure you can't get. All right, that's training around RPE 9. Most of your best gains when you're pushing hard are going to come right there. That's actually ideal, and no, that is not as detrimental. We need to understand the muscle failure between moderate and low reps versus high rep muscle failure. When you're failing on like more than 10 reps, meaning you're failing an 11th rep, a 15th rep, a 20th rep, it's not necessarily your nervous system giving out. It's not your peripheral nervous system. It's not the lack of the ability to always recruit more muscle fibers. It's fatigue. It's the buildup of metabolites that's caused that. That can actually have an anabolic response. Now, it's not necessarily going to train your nervous system the same, but that has an anabolic response. So when we talk about people training to failure with smaller exercises, all right, not big, heavy compounds, using fairly light weight, that's actually beneficial. It's not really a problem, although it can interfere with your recovery sometimes, but that actually has an anabolic response in the body. So that type of training failure is potentially positive. All right, the problem with training with below that, moderately heavy weight, failing on the 7th rep, the 8th rep, failing on the 4th rep. The lower you go, under about 10 reps, the lower you go where you fail a rep, the more detrimental it becomes. And that's because you are really hammering your nervous system. And when you fatigue your peripheral nervous system through failing a rep, and the bigger the exercise, the more important it is, meaning failing it on the bench press isn't going to be as detrimental as failing it on the deadlift. Because the more muscles involved, and the heavier the weight gets, again, failing it on a lower and lower rep, the more detrimental it is to your recovery of your nervous system. Now, peripheral nervous system recovery, when it gets fatigued, is basically a motherfucker. You're going to be weak. You could be weak for up to an entire week from extreme peripheral nervous system fatigue, meaning you failed a big, heavy deadlift rep. You failed a 4th or 5th rep on a deadlift. Your strength on all of your exercises might be shot for an entire week, which means you're going to lose a week worth of training progress. And you don't grow off of the failed reps. That's what people need to understand the difference of. You don't grow off of those. But as far as stopping one rep short of failure, meaning you know you're going to fail that next rep, that's actually pushing the bleeding edge. I would say for most people, that's the bleeding edge right there. That's the most extreme you should go in 95% of your training. A lot of times, a lot of your best training is going to be done to where you stop 2 reps short of failure. All right, that's going to allow you to train at a higher frequency, get more workloads in, all of that. But when you are going through heavier phases or your really heavy, hard days, stopping 1 rep short of failure, like you talked about, is actually going to give you oftentimes pretty much your best possible gains per set or per workout session. But even that can tax your fatigue a bit. Like that can tax your nervous system enough sometimes that it is going to take you longer to recover. So there's a balancing act there, but it's totally reasonable to do that regularly in training as long as you can accommodate it on the recovery end and you're scheduling your training around it. All right, next question. Hey Jason, if someone is running your off-season strength program and is not able to get all the sets reps required for the day, what should they do? I am in week 3, which calls for 5 sets of 10, and barely made it through benching and rows. Through the benching, rows were just fine, but I was unable to complete the required sets reps for the press. Thanks. All right, good question. I'm probably going to make a full video on this one later. This actually warrants an entire video, most likely. So here's what happened there. You barely completed it on the bench press, but the rows were easy. You know what that tells me? You borderline over-predicted your bench press strength, meaning you probably missed your bench press max calculation by like 1%. You're probably okay, but you're close. You very possibly could have slightly overestimated what your bench max is going to be when you did the calculations, right? Because this is all percentage based. Here's where people mess up. Here's where people mess up. You know when you run the program that you're going to be really fatigued after the bench press when you go to the overhead press. So when you test your maxes, here's where people really make a big mistake. They go rest 5 or 10 minutes before they test the overhead press. All right, that's going to throw your percentages off. Your calculations for the overhead are based upon the fact that you're fatigued on the bench press. So you just tested a max on your bench press, a rep max. Let's say you found your 6 rep max on the bench press, right? And you failed because you wouldn't know it's your 6 rep max if the spotter didn't have to help you on a rep, or unless you got pinned or whatever, right? So you have your 6 rep max calculated from your bench press. You're fatigued. You know you're going to have that fatigue still when you get to the 5 sets of 10 week or whatever. Yeah, you know you're going to have that fatigue still when you get to the overhead press. Don't let yourself sit around and recover. When you test your maxes, you go immediately from the bench press to the row. When you finish the row, you go immediately to the overhead press and test it. Like, meaning your testing session should be 15 minutes long tops. You should have, by the time you walk into the gym and walk into the weight room, your little bit of warming up and then testing your training maxes should take 15 minutes or less. If you took 30 minutes to test them, you were really recovered when you got to that overhead press. That is not going to give you an accurate overhead press prediction, because this is the biggest complaint on this program. I have people say, you're not the only one to say this, it's repeatedly people, the overhead press is too hard. Why did you recover before you tested your max on the overhead press? You knew you would be doing the program with the overhead press being fatigued from the bench press already. Test it with very, very quickly. I mean, you should be able to walk in and do one warm up on the row and then test your max. You know roughly where your 6 to 8 rep max is on the row. Pick that weight and row it out to failure, and then go straight to your overhead press. You don't need to warm up on that overhead press. You've already bench pressed and rowed. You go straight to testing your max. And you should be testing that max less than 5 minutes after you failed on that bench press. That's going to give you your truly accurate fatigued overhead press after doing the bench work. And what you're going to find, it might be 10% lower than what you thought it was going to be. Like if you had rested, you might have added 10% to your overhead press. So you're now overhead pressing with 10% more weight than you're supposed to for the program, because it's not your fresh overhead. It's when you're fatigued still from the bench. So that's where people mess up on it, and they end up with some serious miscalculations, and yeah, they run into problems on the program because of it. But that's just the way it is. That's, again, not testing it correctly, and that's okay. Maybe I should have clarified that more in the program. I had hoped intermediate lifters would kind of grasp this by now, but a lot of them didn't, and that's okay. That's why I clarify in things like this. All right, next question. Is everyone expected to reach novice strength level barring the few genetic no-gainers? Is everyone? No. Are the people who I broke down who are capable of reaching them? Should they? Yes. Who should be able to reach my novice strength standards on my program? I don't care about other people's programs, guys. A lot of people are like, well, I trained using this program or that and I never reached them. Well, who gives a fuck? That's not my program. These are the strength standards for people who run my program. My stipulations for people who would reach these standards, and those standards are, for those who forget, a 2-plate per side bench for 3 to 5 reps, preferably 5, a 3-plate per side squat. And for those who don't know what I mean by plates, I'm talking about big 45 or 20 kilo plates. They're going to be close enough we can use them comparable. So that's going to be, for the squat, we mean 140 kilos or 315 pounds. For the deadlift, we mean 4 plates a side. That's 180 kilos for metric and 405 pounds for standard international. You should be hitting those for up to somewhere in the 3 to 5 rep range for my novice standards, preferably 5. All right, making that clear. And a lot of people are like, well, that's crazy. That's what I expect from people on the program over time. Now, it might take some people 18 months instead of a year to do it. It might take some people 2 years, but you will reach it on the program if you follow it through properly, if you meet these other criteria. you're between the ages of 18 and 35. People will be like, well, I don't understand. Why does that matter? Because after 35, your testosterone levels are declining. After 35, your recovery declines. You might not be able to as easily reach standards within the same time frame as someone in their 20s. In fact, you should expect not to. You still might reach it. It's just going to take longer. For people who are at least average height, meaning if you're shorter, you're going to gain less total muscle mass on your frame. Less muscle mass means less strength, less weight moved. Now, shorter people have leverage advantages. But I think shorter guys, meaning anything under about 5'6", if you're 5'4", 5'3", these standards are going to be more extreme. You're probably going to have to go to an intermediate program for a while to reach these strength standards. And that's just, again, the leverage. You have less overall muscle mass because you have a smaller frame. You shouldn't expect to make the same gains as a guy who's somewhere in the 5'9" to 6'1" range. Now, people well over 6 foot should blow these standards out of the water. Tall people can gain more muscle. They can gain more absolute strength. These standards should be a joke for someone who's 6'3". It just is what it is. And the final criteria was people with no major health problems. All right, you need to be in decent health, good health. If you're sick or have any major problem or something, you might not reach these standards. So yeah, outside of not being within those ranges I listed, I expect everyone to be able to reach those. Again, barring genetic no-gainers. Even people with fairly bad genetics for strength, given the workload and the time, they might just need more months to reach it. They should be able to reach these strength standards. Yeah, absolutely. I consider them to be, most guys lifting should be able to reach this. Again, the only exceptions listed are the ones that I gave. Pretty much it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative.